After the episode of Doctor Who called The Devil's Chord, I referred to it as Doctor Who the Musical online, and someone wrote and said bye. And that seems to be the attitude of people who find there are issues with the present Doctor Who. So I thought I'd share what I feel about Doctor Who and where it came from, including from watching the very first episode in 1963. Imagine it's like this. There's no streaming or recorders or anything else. There's only 3 channels, nothing else. If you don't watch it when it's on, you don't watch it. And the BBC at that time is, shall we say, a bit like Hogwarts. There's these huge halls which do various things that are meant to entertain the public. And one of them says drama and another says children's programmes. Well, at that time, since you only had these limited number of channels, you mixed up everything for all sorts. So in the afternoon on a Saturday, typically there'd be soccer, football. And mostly adults would watch that. Towards the evening, there were some newfangled ideas about teenagers, in particular a show called Jukebox Jury, in which people very seriously discussed whether a particular song was going to be a hit and a miss. And this in general was one of the few places you would hear any pop song on the BBC or anywhere else, because there was nowhere else to hear things. And they had, around Saturday tea time, there was a programme for children, intended apparently to be before or after tea time, and then have the children watch this and then go to bed. The drama department, however, got this brilliant idea: why couldn't we tie all these audiences together? The adults from the sports, the teenagers watching the Jukebox Jury, and the little ones watching this programme. Well, they came up with the idea of this time traveller. He would do various things like historical stuff and science fiction. He could be back in the history, or he could be on a spaceship. And to that end, they created the first episode, known as The Unearthly Child, to be broadcast on the 23rd of November 1963. Now, I watched that episode, but there was an event that kind of overshadowed that. On the 22nd of November 1963, JFK was assassinated. And so that was permeating everything, so much so that the BBC repeated it the following week. And those days, it was done rather like the old Buck Rogers B films, as a 25-minute episode with a cliffhanger. And the cliffhanger was usually quite simple. It would be something like an alien creeping up on the Doctor, and then the credits would roll, and you'd have all week to decide what he did about it. And you know he'd do something, but you didn't know exactly what, and there was plenty of speculation about it. The first episode, the first 4, was from a story about the Stone Age and discovery of fire. And this didn't go down that well. In fact, even The Guardian didn't like it. That's unusual for them. It was 4 episodes presented over the next 4 weeks, and included the idea that 2 teachers, one of them a man, went to visit the location where the Doctor's granddaughter was apparently living, and was surprised to find it was a junkyard and not a genuine address, and they found a police box in there, and that was the TARDIS. And those 4, the Doctor, his granddaughter, and the 2 teachers, began the very first adventures. As I say, the first one, about Stone Age people and discovering fire, wasn't that well received. But the next story was. They landed on a planet called Skywell, and they found these mysterious robot-like creatures called Daleks, who would go on to attack Earth and all sorts of other things throughout the entire series of Doctor Who. They were an immediate success. It was very easy to imitate a Dalek if you were in the playground. You could hold out your 2 arms like the manipulator and the gun, and you could go around with a distorted voice saying, "You will be exterminated." And then you were a Dalek. And it swept the country. At one point, I, along with many others, had a Dalek annual, a Dalek pencil case, a battery Dalek. In fact, I've seen one recently on sale for about £30, even though it's got 2 parts missing and it's broken. That's how successful the Daleks were. And there's even one that's available for $10,000, which apparently was on an exhibition. It's apparently unique. So the Daleks started the whole Doctor Who thing more than anything else. This was so successful that it went on for another 26 years till 1989. It started, it was a science fiction serial. People like myself loved it for that. In fact, I was an avid reader of science fiction in those days. I even read stuff that was still science fiction then, such as the moon landing, which didn't happen for another 6 years. Of course, when you write science fiction, you write it to be an adventure. Well, nobody wrote about a moon landing in which you went there, had a look and said, there's not much here, we won't bother again. After 1989, it continued sort of in a lesser way with things like books and audios and even a TV movie at one point. And it was then revived in 2005, where it obviously became rather woke. The claim was that the old one was always political, and it was always historical, and there's even some who have attempted to suggest that the regenerations changed sex. They never did in the classic Doctor Who. There were male Time Lords who changed into males, and there are female Time Lords who changed into females. It did not swap. They also said it was always political and it was always historical, neither which is really that true. Sure, you can find a few examples, but usually they're a throwaway line. Like there's a line in the series The Ark that says humanity has finally got together, working together without prejudice. There's just one line in the entire series. Or there's a series that involves slavery. It wasn't bashing the people over the head about slavery, but it was making it quite clear slavery was wrong. And there's even The Sunmaker, a series in which the Doctor actually quotes Marx about you've nothing to lose but your chains. Nowadays, some people are quite happy to tell you it's not even for white people. It never was. But it always was. It was not meant to be exclusive, but the majority of Britain was white people, and it was aimed at people mostly like me, younger and white and male. And there was nothing wrong with that, and nobody thought there was anything wrong with that. And even in those days, you started to see things that now are probably considered racist, but at the time were actually attacks on racism. There were sitcoms in the 60s and 70s, including Till Death Us Do Part and Love Thy Neighbour, that were attacking racism simply by taking the mickey out of the person who had racist views. The other thing is that it was never sexual. There was no sex whatsoever in the TARDIS. Now, granted, he had a lot of female companions, and they were, well, friendly, but that was it. It was never meant to be anything else. It was meant primarily to be a children's program anyway. There was no need for romantic overtones at all. But I think the biggest complaint is that it's no longer science fiction. Even in the TV magazine I get, it describes this episode we've just had, called 73 Yards, as a fantasy drama, which it clearly is. We've had, in this season, Space Babies, where some babies don't grow up for unknown reasons. We've had The Devil's Chord, where there's some magical way of stealing the music out of people, not really explained. Then we've had Boom, which is something about an algorithm creating a war against nothing, and seems to be a go at sort of capitalism or something like that. And lately now there's 73 Yards, which is some sort of metaphor about alt-right or something like that. It's no Back to the Future about how you can deal with things, but there you go. And it's described by one person as, I didn't understand it, good episode though, and I don't understand myself how they're going to keep up listening figures or viewing figures with those kind of remarks. But indeed, they kind of try and claim they don't need them, as long as there's money to keep them making it from various other things like merchandising. They'll carry on, but there is a limit to that. There's plenty of merchandising that dies a death. But the main thing has always been for me, there has to be a scientific sounding explanation, and it has to be consistent. The doctor can't be getting out a magic powder. Now granted, the sonic Truegraver was always a fixer and handy for the screenwriters, but once you get to David Tennant at one point saying it's wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff, and now Russell T Davies saying the show is a sly step towards fantasy, one can have witchcraft and that sort of thing, and the latest episode of 73 Yards, they're breaking a fairy circle, which apparently is terrible. No explanation, you just have to know that. And it seems that let's have a go at somebody who says protect our borders, presumably the far right, and is going to get some nuclear weapons and immediately got them, he's going to nuke somewhere. Again, no explanation, and you just follow this woman around who's really her in the future or some such, and eventually, because she manages to warn the doctor, he doesn't break the fairy circle. Wow, yeah. What can I say about that? It's getting almost impossible for me to watch. I mean, even if I allow for the goblins instead of real monsters or some kind of science fiction thing, and no explanations of how we do things or why fairy circles are important, it's now becoming like complete nonsense, which is what Russell T Davies claims science fiction is. Anyone who thinks science fiction is complete nonsense shouldn't be anywhere near a show of science fiction. Because the whole point about science fiction, unlike fantasy, there are rules and you have to keep to the environment you've created. You can't suddenly have, I don't know, maybe time travel in Star Wars or something like that. It doesn't exist in that universe. And so, all I can say is, it's not clear to me that Doctor Who is going to survive in spite of the claims to the contrary. And if you're going to blame the fandom, the ones leaving, for that, then I think you're very myopic. So thanks very much for listening. I have put a little thing about donations or tip in the link to this, and I appreciate that if you would care to hear some more from me at some time in the future. Anyway, thank you.